Okay, children, as we have completed chapter number 4, that was psychological disorders. Now we are going to start chapter number 5, therapeutic approaches. You all have now understood what all kinds of disorders are there, what are their symptoms. Now there is a general question, a very basic question arises in our mind, that are some therapies or are some preventive measures, or there is some cure available or not, right? So now we're going to talk about various kind of therapies which could be given for the treatment of specific type of disorder, right? So chapter number 5, therapeutic approaches. Now, first of all, we have to understand the nature and process of any psychotherapy. Under therapeutic approaches, we're going to study about various kind of psychotherapies, right? So to start with the basic term, psychotherapy is what? It is a voluntary relationship between the one seeking treatment, or the client you can say, and the one who treats, or the therapist, right? Psychotherapy is a voluntary relationship. If I just explain voluntary means a mutual consent is there. Nobody is forced into this relationship. The client also came up with his own consent. The therapist is also ready to treat that patient, that client. So psychotherapy is a voluntary relationship between the client and the therapist, right? The purpose of the relationship is to help the client to solve the psychological problems faced by him or her. So basically what this therapy is focused upon, what is the aim? To treat the various psychological problems through which the client is going on. Now, in explaining various kinds of psychotherapies, we have to be very specific. Although it is a very general thing, we can explain it on our own, in our own language. But to remember certain keywords, certain points, you will going to elaborate on that basis. So it will be simple for you people only. So just have certain key points, certain key terms in your mind, and then start going for the explanation. So here I am telling you 3 words, 3 terms which psychotherapies aim at changing. The first one is maladaptive behavior. Any psychotherapy is aiming at changing any maladaptive behavior. You all understand the meaning of maladaptive? The behavior which is not adaptive to the situation, which is not adjustable, and which is not correct at the same time, right? It is causing some harm to the psychological and physical makeup of a person. So first one is maladaptive behavior. Second is decreasing the sense of personal distress. Any psychotherapy aims at decreasing the personal distress. Person is having certain stress which is very harmful, which is hindering the normal functioning of his life. So what the psychotherapy is aiming at, it aims at reducing the amount of distress which is experienced by that person, right? The third thing is helping the client to adapt better to her or his environment. If a person is able to adapt to the situations, is able to adapt to the changes that are introduced from time to time in our society, in our life, that person is satisfied, successful, happy, and a positive person, right? So adaptation, adjustment are very important things in our life. So keep these 3 things in your mind and then go on with the explanation in your own language. What psychotherapies are aiming at? They are trying to change the maladaptive behavior, first thing. Second thing, they are trying to decrease the amount of distress. Use the word distress, yes, experienced by the client. And the third one, it enhances the adaptation level, the adjustment level of a person to his environment, right? Now, psychotherapeutic approaches have the following characteristics. Now we talk about the therapeutic approaches. These approaches have certain characteristics, certain features. What are they? The first one is there is systematic application of principles underlying the different theories of therapy. See, to be very clear, we're going to discuss about various kind of therapies into this chapter, right? So, to make more clear and to be more precise, every therapy is following certain principles. I'll explain you what are the principles, what are those principles. But every therapy, suppose I say psychodynamic therapy, right? If I take the example of psychodynamic therapy, it has certain principles. So every therapy is following certain principles. This is the first characteristic. Second one, persons who have received practical training under expert supervision can practice psychotherapy. A person who has received a specific training under expert supervision is mandatory, right? If a person is not trained, if a person is not experienced into this field, what will he do? He will do more harm than giving benefit, unintentionally also. He is not intentionally doing this, but if he is not having the required experience and the required expertise which is needed, he or she is doing a lot of harm to the client. So supervision, training, and experience are very important. The third one is the therapeutic situation involves a therapist and a client who seeks and receives help for his or emotional problems. This is very general. As we talk about that in any therapy, a client is there and a therapist is there, right? And they are maintaining the relationship. Why? Because client want to get treated and therapist is intended to treat the client. This was the third characteristic. Now, what is the fourth one? The interaction of these two persons. Who are those two persons? The therapist and the client. They result in the consolidation or formation of the therapeutic relationship. Now, when these two people interact with each other for a particular duration of time, what they develop, what they formulate, or what they form a therapeutic relationship. Why therapeutic? Because there is a particular goal behind that relationship. Now, what kind of relationship? This relationship is confidential, first of all. Second, it is interpersonal. And third, it is dynamic. Confidential, you all know that things should not be leaked outside without the consent. And if it is not required, the therapist should not pass it to any other person except the client. Trust should be there, we can say. Second is interpersonal, yes, because two persons are involved, it is interpersonal. And dynamic relationship because it keeps on changing according to the situation, and sometimes it is intentionally done. So dynamic, as if situations are changing in client's life, the therapist shift the therapy also, and he also introduce certain changes in treating that client, right? So these were the four characteristics or features of psychotherapeutic therapies, right? Or you can say approaches. Now next come all these psychotherapies aim at a few or many of these following goals. We talked about the features and characteristics. Now we are going to read about the aim of any psychotherapy. You can use the word aim, you can use the word goal, anything. What are these goals of psychotherapies? First is reinforcing clients' resolve betterment. We always try as a therapist to reinforce the client for achieving betterment, to achieve his fullest potential, right? Second is lessening emotional pressure. This is very simple. Unfolding the potential for positive growth. Therapist guide the client. He, make him sometimes introduce his own characteristics the client is also not aware of. So the therapist is unfolding the potential for positive growth of the client. Modifying habits, that means changing habits, changing thinking patterns. Thinking patterns have to be changed a lot because it is ultimately influencing your activities, your behavior. Increasing self-awareness. A person has to be self-aware to, get the things done, to get his goals achieved. A person should be aware about his strength, about his weaknesses. So a therapist is trying to help that person become self-aware. Improving interpersonal relations and communication. If we are living in a society, we have to maintain certain relations, we have to be communicative, right? So all these things, these are some certain skills which make you a better and a positive person. So all these things are helped by a therapist to, to introduce to that client. Facilitating decision making. Now next is a very important part. Some people are able to do things in a very good way, but at the last, when decision has to be made, they just feel helpless. They need certain suggestion, they need someone's advice, or they need someone who guide them, to choose out of them. So decision making is a very complicated task. It is not that easy. So every individuals are not good at decision making. So what therapist is helping? Therapist is facilitating the decision making process for that person. Becoming aware of one's choices in life, more or less similar, self-aware. You should be aware of one's choices in your life, relating to one's social environment in a more creative and self-aware manner. Again, the same things, that you have to be communicative, you have to maintain relationships, you have to interact people in society. So you have to be more creative, because creativity brings happiness, it brings satisfaction. So in a very creative and self-aware manner. Self-awareness is very important. If you are aware about your about your limitations, about your strength, that will help you in achieving the goals at the right time, in the right direction, and satisfaction will be there ultimately. So all these things are interrelated, right? So these were certain goals of psychotherapies. So what we have studied, what is the definition of psychotherapy, then what are the aims and goals of psychotherapies, what are the characteristics of psychotherapeutic approaches, right? So you're just going to explain or give a brief introduction if some question comes on nature and process of psychotherapy. Fine. Now let us begin the next topic, that is therapeutic relationship. The special relationship between the client and the therapist is known as therapeutic relationship or alliance. A specific term, it has been used, alliance. What does it mean? It means that a relationship that is very special is shared by two persons, the therapist and the client. It is neither a passing acquaintance nor a permanent and lasting relationship. See, very important terms are there. If we are talking about certain relationship which they have termed as alliance, it means it is not a passing acquaintance, that we cannot pass that relation to someone else. Second, nor a permanent and lasting relationship. These kind of therapeutic relationships or alliance are not permanent kind of relationship. Because what happens during distress, if a client gets a positive treatment from someone, what naturally and what is very obvious, that person develops a very positive relationship for the therapist, and that client, some clients want to make it for their life forever. They want that relationship to be continued in their life, but it is not possible, right? A therapist is a professional person, so this relationship is not permanent, and you can say not a lasting relationship. Fine. So clear with the word alliance. Now come upon, there are two major components of this alliance. What are those? Let's start with the first one. The first component is the contractual nature of the relationship, in which two willing individuals, the client and the therapist, enter into a partnership which aims at helping the client overcome his or her problems. Right? Contractual की जब बात करते हैं, when the word contract comes, what does this mean? First of all, it is a voluntary or willing relationship. And then it is a kind of partnership in which what is the aim of the therapist to make that client overcome from his or her problems. Right? So the first component is contractual nature. Then you'll just keep on explaining it. After that, the second component is what? It is the limited duration of the therapy. Limited duration, the same thing, that it is not permanent, it is not a long lasting relationship. There is a particular duration based upon different kind of therapies. As we talk about psychodynamic therapy, it is quite a long therapy which even goes for years. When we talk about behavior therapy or existential therapy, these are short duration therapies which end up sometimes in months also. Right? So depending upon the kind of disorder and depending upon the type of therapy which we are using. So two components of therapeutic alliance. The first one, it is contractual in nature, right? And second thing, it is related to the duration of that therapy. Fine. Now we have to explain the things little bit more when we talk about therapeutic relationship, that what kind of relationship it is all about. A word has been given in black bold letters: unconditional positive regard. What does this mean? We have done this thing in client-centered therapy. I think Sanskriti has asked me this question, and I hope you people remember. This word has came under which approach? Humanistic existential approach. Unconditional positive regard, which is a very prime feature of client-centered therapy given by whom? Carl Roger. Yes. So unconditional positive regard mein what is happening? As a therapist, if I am, listening to the problems of my client, I have to I have to give that unconditional regard to the problems. Try to understand, I cannot be, negative. I cannot be neutral. Instead, I have to be very positive. Suppose a teenage girl is telling me her problems, that she doesn't, like to be interfered much by her parents or by any elder people, by his or her teachers or anyone. So I have to be very positive. Although I have, I do not maintain or do not have this view that there is an interference from your parents or from your teacher's side. They always do the things for your betterment. This is my thinking, right? But then also I have to give unconditional positive regard to that girl while listening to the problems. If I start showing my negative body language, or if I start protesting the things, that girl will never be able to open up, will never be able to share all the true things with me, and we will not able to maintain our trusting and confidential relationship. Right? So I have to give unconditional positive regard, that I am not having any kind of attitude toward this. I am giving a very positive, regard to that girl's problem. And sometimes what happened, while speaking, the client become rude also, and they also, favor their wrong deeds. They are not ready to accept their mistakes or faults. They always, defend themselves. It happens in many cases. That is why those persons are suffering from some kind of problem, right? So it is very difficult to make them understand. So these persons become rude also. They confine their wrong things. They also hide many things. So an unconditional positive regard will facilitate that person to open up, to share what he is really feeling, and we can make a trusting relationship with that person, right? So that is all about unconditional positive regard. Now there are certain words, please underline the difference between empathy, the difference between sympathy, and what is intellectual understanding. Three terms are given, page number 91, first column, last lines. Empathy, you all understand, whenever we think or whenever we take the problem from others' point of view, right? Whenever we get into someone other's shoes. We use this idiom a lot, putting oneself in the other person's shoes. That means try to look at the things from their point of view, right? This is known as empathy. What is sympathy then? Sympathy means that one has compassion and pity towards the suffering of another, but is not able to feel like the other person, right? We always have sympathy for the poor people. We always have, compassion. We feel pity on their situation, but can we really feel what they are actually feeling, or from their perspective, from their point of view? No. So sympathy simply means compassion and pity for the persons, but we are not able to feel their feelings from their point of view. The third term is their intellectual understanding. The meaning of this word is that it is very cold in the sense. Why cold? The person is unable to feel like the other person and does not feel sympathy either, right? In intellectual understanding, neither empathy is there nor sympathy is there. So that is why this term is very cold, right? Intellectual understanding, we are just getting the facts understood. We are just taking the things as it is, factual information. We are applying our intelligence. We are not applying our emotions anywhere. So what the basic difference between empathy, sympathy, and intellectual understanding. Fine. This was all about therapeutic relationship. Now let us start with the type of therapies. The next topic is type of therapies, and under this there are basically three types. Three broad groups are there. First one is psychodynamic, second one is behavior, and third one is existential. Whenever we'll talk about the therapies into this section, three broad categories are given: psychodynamic, behavior, and existential therapies, right? Now we're going to discuss about the various parameters which are there in discussing all these theories. There are 6 types of parameters that we're going to continue in tomorrow's class. For today, I think it is sufficient as we are running short of time and will not be